everyone. Welcome back to the Nintendo Prime Podcast. This is episode 3 of our new season. How's it going? To my left, your guys' right, we have in the foreground here, Mr. Eric Moore, our co-host.
Hello.
And then directly dead center on our fancy-dancy, really old school LCD TV, we got Mr. HMK bouncing his head back there.
Is this where I talk?
I mean, it's up to you.
What's up, guys? I'm HMK, and I'm glad to be back on the new rejuvenated Nintendo Prime podcast. And I'm glad to be here. I'm ready to get into the noise.
You saw the set. What are you thinking? You like this set?
Oh man, I love it, bro. And when I saw when he invited me to the call and the set just went up like whoosh, I'm like, bro, that is nice. I love it.
Yeah, it was a lot of planning for me to get it working. Yeah. We used to have lights behind the TV, but then that wasn't working on camera. And you know what? This looks fly as hell, so I'm gonna go with it.
Nice.
All right, so guys, we're going to be talking a lot about Switch Pro. It's kind of the theme of this episode. I realize there's been nothing but Switch Pro videos on my channel every day, so I get it. I'm going to try to shut up a lot besides providing context because I have said a lot about Switch Pro over the last week. We also might dive a little bit into the Microsoft Bethesda acquisition now that that's finalized, and some stuff that Phil Spencer said about it, which should have been all too obvious. That's pretty much the theme of it. We'll see if we rattle off into other topics as it goes. So let's just start with, I guess, the thing that really got the ball rolling over the last week, which is probably that report from Bloomberg by Machizuki Takahashi. He used to work at Wall Street Journal. Now he works at Bloomberg. He has factual sources inside the manufacturing lines. I think he actually works out of Japan. He provided some information just like he did back for the Switch Lite, and he's actually been teasing Switch Pro screen info specifically for a couple of years now, that Nintendo's been trying to get some stuff in there. Nintendo technically had a contract with Oled Displays. Apparently they didn't go in that direction because according to him now, they're going with Samsung. Now, they did... Technically, we know this. You can actually look this up. Nintendo did open a new manufacturing line at a Samsung factory. So that, didn't know if it meant anything at the time because obviously they were struggling in China to get Switches made during the pandemic. So, okay, they're just doing more production outside of China. Should you really read much into it? Well, it turns out that according to Machizuki, they have a contract in place with Samsung to produce new screens for a new Switch. The screens will be 720p still, which I know some people aren't too happy about that. But they're going to be OLED displays, rigid OLED to be exact. To explain the difference there's flexible OLED. That's what a lot of phones use when they use OLED. A lot of TVs use it as well. It's a lot more conformative and easy to shape, easy to produce, but also more expensive. Rigid displays are, they're rigid. They're hard. You can crack them. But they're just as good as the flexible displays in terms of the color accuracy, the contrast, the nits and all that jazz. So there's not really any downside to it other than technically you could break it in half. But if you're breaking your Switch in half, I think you have other problems.
You're not wrong there.
So that being said, they're using rigid displays, apparently just because Samsung has a bunch of them laying around because people moved on to the flexible display technology. So probably got it as a cheap contract, according to him. He said it will have a 7-inch display. So if you look at kind of like the Switch we got here on the desk, it's like eliminating the bezel on the Switch is roughly what the 7 inches would be. And then they're going to, what was it? They're going to have 4K output, I think he said, something like that when it's docked, which there's been a lot of rumors about 4K and DLSS with the Switch Pro from multiple sources. So that's something that he confirmed again. We'll have 4K output when docked. And then, it's supposedly coming this year. According to his sources, the plan right now is to release it this year. So let's just start there because that's where everything kind of snowballs from there. All the other information from other sources began really with Bloomberg blowing the top off this. And of course, when did they do it but on the 4th anniversary of Nintendo Switch? It's like they've been sitting on it waiting for that anniversary to drop the info. Probably. It had to be intentional.
Oh, for sure.
So what are you guys' thoughts just on that aspect before we get into some other stuff that's come out since then? OLED, but only 720, but it's a bigger screen and 4K. What the hell?
So let me get things started off the bat. I've seen a lot of people complain about the OLED screen. Only 720p in my hands and stuff. And I'm like, considering that I've seen a lot of reports about how you're supposed to use the Switch in handheld mode and stuff, I don't really think that's big of a deal, because of course, people want to, off the bat, they want bigger, better. Why can't it be 1080p? Why can't it be beyond this? In the palm of your hands. There's other like phones, tablets that are able to achieve 1080p in your hands. And then at the point, the point of contention is that do you really need 1080p in your hands? In my opinion, I don't really think you do, especially if you're holding your Switch as you're supposed to be holding, like probably at arm's length and stuff. The human eye can only process the amount of pixels needed for it to look nice in the palm of your hands. And the fact that it's going from, I'm pretty sure it's like 6.6 inches to 7 inches for the Switch, and then this supposed revision.
It's 5.5. Really it's 5.5 for Switch Lite. I think it's like 6.1, 6.2. I think right now on the regular, it's something like that. So 7 inches. I mean, it does look bigger. Like I said, you get rid of the bezel. That's basically the size of the screen if you measure diagonally.
So, all things considered, it's going to be a leap from what we know the Switch currently when you're not using a light, but, using it in the palm of your hand, 720p, I still think it's not some sort of deal breaker or something that people should look at as like, oh, they're doing the same thing again, but just a bigger screen. It's not going to look as well. Like literally this 720p in the palm of your hand. We used to have 720p TVs that were, about 24, 25 inches and stuff. And then we jumped from 1080p. Then we tried to do the jump to 3D. And then we did the jump to 4K eventually. And then spinning off that point, with the Switch Pro, I don't want to call it a Pro. This is like a revision. Maybe it's going to be called the Pro, whatever. It going into 4K being docked is not something that I feel that people should really think it's like, there's two lines of thinking that I've seen very common on the internet, where it's like, oh, this Switch putting out 4K is going to look amazing, and it's the next step, and Nintendo always had to do this step, in order to compete with, the PS4 Pro or the PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, Xbox One X, whatever. And that was the necessary leap in order for them to compete with those type of consoles. And then there are people that are saying that, like, oh, a Switch-like console being able to, produce 4K on a screen, that seems out of the question. I don't think it's possible. And those two lines of thinking, I think, is like born from the notion that people really think that if the Switch is going to be capable of 4K in docked mode, they're going to see some sort of insane leap in graphical capability of what these games are going to be crafted as from developers. And I honestly don't think that. I feel like, just because you hear 4K is a huge buzzword these days, is that, oh, it must be like, oh, I could have to see all of the pores on Link's skin, or I see all of the hairs coming out of Mario's forearm or whatever. I don't think that. I just think, we're going to get a smoother, more powerful experience from these games that we've seen, clock at around 900p, like Breath of the Wild, and that struggle at 30 frames per second, especially when you go to areas like the Korok Forest. We're gonna have a Switch that's capable of maybe running that at 60 frames and then smoothing out retroactively these games to upscaling them to 4K like smoothness or quality or whatever you want to call it. And I feel that a lot of people are just getting it way out of context of what they expect this console is going to, like, in 4K at least, is going to be able to produce. I think it's going to be a leap. I think it's going to be the next step of what Nintendo wants the Switch to be. But I think people are just really, thinking that step is going to be huge when it's going to be big, and people are going to think it's huge. I think it's going to be big, but people think it's going to be huge, and I don't think it's going to be huge. And that's my take on the whole screen and 4K nonsense.
Yeah, so I think a realistic expectation, like the 720p screen, to me, you have to remember, folks, that most games, AAA-wise, Nintendo or third party, not indie, but AAA-wise, don't actually run at 720p on the Switch right now in handheld. They run at 540p, 360p. We've seen some go as low as 240p. So being able to just have the power inside to hit a native 720 is already going to look better than the current Switch without the resolution bump, because what's more important is hitting the native resolution. If you increase that native resolution to 1080p, you're asking the Switch to do more in handheld, which I think is probably unrealistic for battery life alone. Remember, this is a gaming machine. If you ever take like a bigger game on your phone, okay, and you are playing, say, Fortnite or PUBG, I guess, since Fortnite's like having issues on phones right now with lawsuits and stuff. But say like you're playing PUBG or Call of Duty Mobile or whatever on your phone. If you play it for like an hour, your phone dies. Okay, they don't want Switch to die after an hour being used in handheld. So
Right.
they have a lot of consideration to consider a power draw, not just power draw of having to power a 1080p screen, but then having to possibly increase the clock speeds on the whatever chip they end up using to hit native 1080p in the games, or we're just going to be stuck in the same situation we are now, where nothing runs at the native screen setting and it looks bad again. I think it's more important we hit native 720p than worry about running lower resolutions on a higher resolution screen. So there's that part. For 4K, I mean, it's all about DLSS to me. If those rumors on DLSS are true, there's separate RT cores you add to the chip that upscales for you. Now, Eric, what are your thoughts on like the 720p panel or any of this stuff?
I mean, it'd be nice to have quote-unquote 4K, but like you said, if the game's not going to take advantage of it, that's just going to cost more to put that in there. If nobody's going to take part in it, what's the point? And you got to have the power, like you said, you got to have the power to do it. I have a feeling that it's going to be more pricey to go that route than maybe even a 1080p, 720p route, and have the power to push all games to that native screen resolution.
Well, so when people look at what the Switch Pro can be, I think a good example to look at is the new 3DS. The new 3DS, I know people think it was a minor upgrade. It like doubled or tripled the CPU power of the original 3DS. It added significantly more RAM. It didn't touch the GPU, but what we saw were games like, I'm sure HFK probably remembers, like Hyrule Warriors Legends on 3DS ran at almost...
Oh, man. Don't even remind me.
Like, on new 3DS, it actually technically ran at a better frame rate than the Wii U original release. Crazy. I don't know how that happened, because the Wii U is more powerful, but it just did. Probably because it runs at a much lower resolution, of course. And then the OG 3DS version of it, I mean, single-digit frames. I don't even know why they bothered with it. And when they ended up doing they had another Warriors game called Fire Emblem Warriors or something.
Fire Emblem Warriors, yeah.
Yeah. They had that come out on 3DS. They didn't even release it on the OG 3DS after how shit Hyrule Warriors Legends ran on.
Man, I dare you guys to try and run that game on an OG 3DS. Man, I swear up, when I tried it the first time, I felt smoke coming out of it, man. Like, this ain't it.
So we have to look at realistic for me with Switch Pro when you just talk about the Bloomberg, and even when you bring in some of the other information we're going to bring in here in a bit, is this, you don't look at this to be like a next gen experience. We have heard from people like Imran Khan, who ironically he used to actually work under me at Zelda Informer, but then he somehow became a bigwig writer. Good for him. At Game Informer and Kotaku and some other outlets, and so he's got some insider sources, and he's been like, hey, look, like if people are expecting this to be a PlayStation 4 Pro, it's not going to be that. But if you expect resolution and frame rate bumps, that's what you should be looking for, and that's important because, as you said, Breath of the Wild 60 FPS, that's huge. Like,
oh, definitely.
Right.
That's huge. Being able to run Breath of the Wild at a higher resolution and also hit 60 FPS, it doesn't have to have a big graphical bump. Just look at Breath of the Wild running, at 4K 60 on PC without any other graphical changes. It looks phenomenal and it plays so smooth. Like, that's what you need to look at. Hit the current games that are on Switch today, actually run them at the native resolutions the system's capable of, but then bump the frame rate up. Like, that's what we're talking about. Now, are some third-party games not going to do that? Like, say they decide they're finally going to bring a Call of Duty over. Are they going to say, screw it, we're chopping it to 30 FPS so we can have prettier visuals? Yeah, that could be a choice they make. But that's not to say that there is going to be a massive power boost that's going to make you feel like, oh, this game looks so significantly better than it did on the old Switch. It does from a frame rate perspective. It does from a resolution perspective. And I think that is a massive deal because the current Switch shows its age. You know, we just got Apex Legends out on it. Runs fine. It runs what you expect. It's pretty much a lock 30 FPS. It stays at it pretty consistently. And yeah, it's blurry. That's typical, but it doesn't run anywhere close to native resolution. So imagine the Apex Legends on Switch Pro can run at 60 FPS and native resolution. Is that not a big deal?
Right.
That's an extremely huge deal, you know, because I feel that the point is being missed again once only because of the buzzword of 4K, and that's one question I want to pose to you guys after I get through my thought is that for me, like everything you're saying is like that's what matters most to me as a gamer. People would say 4K resolution, 4K this, 4K that. I'm like, bro, if I can get Breath of the Wild, like even if it doesn't reach 1080p, even if it sticks at 900p, if it runs at 60 frames, that's a win for me. That's gigantic for me because I mean, like a lot of games on the Switch, with the entirety of Nintendo's bag and stuff, they don't focus on the whole photorealistic graphical type deal. They opt for more cel shaded, more unique, quirky type of game styles and art styles and stuff that really become timeless like over time, such as Breath of the Wild. If you look back, Wind Waker, especially how good Wind Waker HD looked on the Wii U and whatnot, they opt from those styles that are truly timeless. And then seeing those styles like run better and stuff, like I really don't need to see every follicle on Link's forehead, like everyone's like, oh yeah, 4K photorealistic is the wave. That thing gets that shit gets really outdated like it's super fast because of this like stupid ass arms race that all these other developers are trying to do in order to make their console achieve the greater graphics and stuff. I'm like, bro, if you make a beautiful game outside of the need to create something that looks just like in real life, I mean, I'm escaping real life in order to play games, so I don't really need to see that kind of noise. If you're going to achieve that in like a huge graphical step up that caps at 1080 but has 60 frames per second locked in, then I'm a happy camper. And, that's the question I want to pose to you guys is that, do you feel that, like with this apparent, it's going to achieve 4K, but is it though? Do you think that they're just, attaching this or are going to attach this word to the Pro in order to drive sales for those people who are like, oh yeah, 4K, haha, the best and whatnot. And then, at the end of the day, probably like a handful of games by the time of the Switch's 4 remaining years of lifespan, they're only going to have like, this many 4K games that are going to be, counted on the one hand. What do you guys think about that?
Well, okay, so my thought is, because since there's been so many other people saying that, hey, this thing's going to have DLSS, my thing is, we gotta remember, we have a new president, okay? We don't have Iwata anymore. We don't have Kimishima. Rest in peace, Iwata. Great guy. But we have Furukawa, who's recently came out and said, dude, every year's a do or die. We want to avoid the cliff that Nintendo keeps falling off of every single time we have a major success. We hit a point, we crash, and then we have to come up with something new and pray to God that it works again. He doesn't want to go down that cycle that he's seen happen in his like 20-something years at Nintendo. Because people forget, Furukawa's been with Nintendo a long time. He's just been on the business side where he's seen the finances. He's seen what happens when Nintendo crashes, and he's like, that's just not like a long-term plan for success, even though it's worked to this point. What happens if you have multiple Wii U like failures in a row? That's not going to fly, Like, yeah, they're fine. They have the money in the bank. It's not like they're going to go to business, but it's like they might go to the console business. And so they want to, he's looking at it as, okay, if I look at every year as we need to kill it every single year. And yes, I know people can argue the game release last year slate didn't kill it. It killed it at the sales charts. That's all Nintendo cares about. So you can say they relied on ports and Animal Crossing. That's fine, but they killed it on the sales charts. So
Yep.
That's a win for Furukawa. He doesn't care how they did it. He cares that they did it. So you look at it from that new perspective. Nintendo at the time, when they came out with Nintendo Wii, HD TVs were starting to become a thing, but they weren't in every home, right? So their idea was, let's release a budget console that doesn't target HD, that we could release it cheaper than the competition, and do the unique motion controls. And they kind of bet on the fact that people aren't going to care about HD right away. And they didn't. and the Wii flew off shelves. It got to a point where HD started mattering more, and then we started seeing PS3 and Xbox 360 sell more and more and more as HD TV rates became normalized. And I think one thing to consider why Nintendo would even mention the words 4K, if they even mention it. It might just have it, and they might not even talk about it. But if they mention it, it has to be because you can't go to a local store and buy a 1080p TV at anything that's over 24 inches. It's all 4K everywhere for like $200. You can get a 32-inch 4K TV for $200 right now at Walmart. I literally saw it the other day. You can walk in and buy it right now. So Nintendo probably recognizes that right now, anytime someone buys a new TV, it's 4K. Mm-hmm. It's just going to be. Whether it's a really, really nice 4K, like, I think to get the best of the best out of the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, you have to spend like $3,000 to get like everything. The 120 FPS, the perfect HDR, the perfect variable refresh rate and all that. Like, it's really expensive to really take full advantage of those systems. But most people will take advantage of just the pure 4K 60 ability because even the cheap TVs have that. So to me, and the only reason Nintendo might mention it is, hey, look, if they go with DLSS doesn't affect the actual GPU that's producing the graphics. All it basically is separate cores that are added to the chip, and anything that is not Tegra X1 level, but anything that's not Ampere. Ampere's their latest gen. Whatever the gen was before, the 2000 series cards on computers. So those two gens, I keep forgetting. There's DLSS 1.0 all the way up to 1.9, and then DLSS 2.0. Whichever they go with, if they go with any of that stuff, and it has DLSS, it doesn't affect the graphical capabilities of the GPU. Well, all it does is upscale in a way that's wonderful. You guys want examples? Go on YouTube right now, look up 1080p, even 720p if you want, DLSS upscale for Control to 4K. And just look at that versus raw 4K. And tell me that your naked eye can really see much of a difference. You probably can't. That's the whole point of DLSS. It makes it so if Nintendo's paying attention, and this is a different precedent that might be like, hey, look, maybe our issue with Wii is we were way too slow to get into the HD TVs once they became out. Maybe we should have did a Wii HD if he was in control instead of waiting and doing the Wii U. So maybe he's like, look, if we can get a Switch out there that has the ability to cleanly upscale, we're still outputting no more than 1080p. That's still our target in dock mode is 1080p native. But if we have DLSS that can make it look good on a 4K TV, that's all he cares about. Make it look good on a 4K TV. It doesn't need to be native 4K like the other consoles are trying to hit. This is not a PlayStation 5. They're not pretending it's a PlayStation 5. But they want to take Mario Odyssey and make it look crisp on your 4K TV without needing necessarily the power to do it natively. That's what I think Nintendo's possibly looking at here. And we got to remember, they are partnered with NVIDIA, the company that pioneered this technology. Now, this technology is coming to the AMD side as well, and to PlayStation 5 and Series X, and it'll be interesting to see how it works on that end. But NVIDIA's been messing with this stuff for 5 years. So that, I think, is more the spin. It's not so much Nintendo trying to say, come get your 4K game in here. It's more like, dude, if you happen to hook this up to a 4K TV, hey, it don't look blurry on your 65-inch 4K anymore. Right. We took care of it.
No.
That's their goal. Like, it's not to make you have all these impressive visuals. It's like, dude, Breath of the Wild already looks gorgeous. Now imagine it's not blurry on your 65-inch 4K TV. Okay, then. That's a big deal. And I think that's what they're going for, is just to, more so, not for the high-end TVs, but since all the low-end's 4K as well, we just want it to look good on 4K without having to have the power to do native. And I think that's what we're looking at here. Now, Eric, I'm very curious on your thoughts. Because, I don't know if you even mess with 4K TVs at your house or anything like that. You did have a really nice TV at one point, but that was a while ago. Probably that wasn't 4K.
Blasted by lightning. I'm pissed.
Yeah,
so it was my nice plasma TV.
Oh, that sucks. And you guys remember plasma? Yeah, when that was a big deal. Yeah, he had one of those really nice plasmas.
Was beautiful.
Yeah, that was. Dude, I remember watching sports on that thing. I was like, dude, this thing is the shit.
There is absolutely no motion drag on that thing anywhere.
Well, now there's nothing on it anywhere.
Well, yes, now there's nothing on it anywhere.
But, so like, what are your thoughts on this? Like, do you think Nintendo is actually going to do something nice to make it run at 4K, but like still it's not really adding power to the system to do it?
Right. In docked mode, I would expect something done. Handheld, I'm personally myself, I'm okay with the screen the way it is now. I mean, it doesn't bother me that it still looks beautiful to me.
Yeah. I think the only thing's the bezel.
Right.
The bezel is something that makes it feel dated.
That's been something that we've said from the very
beginning. It's like, man, this is a really big bezel even for 2017.
Right.
But like, whatever. It's fine for now, but when we get to 2020, 2021, is it really going to seem fine?
Right.
People don't really complain, but they do bring it up. Like, it feels like a lot of wasted real estate.
Yeah, well, for sure. No, for sure.
Which apparently they're taking care of.
And so, to have 4K in handheld, whatever.
Who cares about that?
Yeah, right.
The 4K in handheld is not going to happen.
No, for sure.
So.
But even then, I got a question for you. If they were to able to hit the 4K upscale, but yet, how Breath of the Wild sometimes has those frame rate drops.
Yep.
So is that going to be more clearly visible then because we're upscaled to 4K?
So sometimes that depends on your TV.
No, I'm talking just handheld.
Handheld? Well, handheld won't matter. They won't even use DLS in handheld.
Okay.
They'll just have that turned off. It'll save battery life. Just turn off.
No, I'm saying if they were to do somehow upscale to 4K in... I know they're not, but if they were...
Well, one thing... So we talked a lot about DLSS and like how it affects resolution. What people don't often realize is it's not just how it affects resolution. Go look at the frame rate of games when DLSS is turned on. The frame rate goes up as well.
Okay.
I'm not sure why the frame rate goes up per se. It just does. So...
Right.
That is also something that, to consider, that any game that has an unlocked frame rate also is just going to run naturally better without even devs updating.
Because my biggest concern would be you get up to 4K and then you all of a sudden start seeing some frame rate drops. Are you going to see that more clearly because it's 4K?
Well, I mean, so frame rate drops, to me, it's more of a feel thing when you're playing.
Yeah. So,
like, sometimes it's jarring. Like, if it drops to single frames. Like, there's times, like, in Kokiri Forest... especially when it launched on Switch. Like,
oh man,
it hit some single digits that were pretty rough. They have patched it since then, and it's not as bad today, but you still can feel it's kind of chugging in there.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing. Kakariko Village, it could chug in there sometimes a little bit too. It's a lot better now. They have patched it. It was interesting, like when it released and it ran better on Wii U, but then people got to remember it was made for that system,
right?
But yeah, I think I think that just comes down to feel.
Okay.
Yeah. More so than unless it hits that single digits. That's when it doesn't matter what resolution you're at, you're gonna feel that.
Right.
I mean, I felt that on handheld on Switch at launch.
Yeah.
I was like, ooh.
So I'm about to go try right now to see how it looks now on handheld because I haven't played this game in handheld in the longest.
Right.
Yeah.
I know. Still beat it
because they did do some updates to it, so it is a little smoother, but it's still not perfect.
Yeah.
Last time I played, anyways, and I have a new save file on Breath of the Wild, so I'm not back to Kokiri Forest yet. But
yeah. No. So to kind of wrap things up on my end, I don't really care if handheld goes, super big, which I know they're not. Again, they said, according to this, anyways, 720p. So I don't really care about that. I mean, would it be nice to make it look grand on your 4K TV? Absolutely. I mean, I'm pretty sure my new TV is 4K. So,
probably if it's a new TV.
Yeah, I got.
Is it bigger than 24 inches?
Yeah, it's 55.
No, but it's probably 4K.
Yeah,
they don't really make them at
right.
of that anymore.
Would it be nice to have? Once you get up to that size, it's nice to not have the blur or
the blur. Yeah. Now,
So-
what I think is going to be interesting here is one thing that's just infamous on Nintendo platforms is anti-aliasing. Nintendo just doesn't do it. And what's interesting is the crisper the image looks, the more the anti-aliasing actually stands out, where you can see jaggy edges. One thing, I mean, I don't think this is magically going to happen, but it would be cool to see maybe, hey, Nintendo decides to use anti-aliasing now. It would just be kind of nice. There are ways you can handle it externally. If you buy like the M Classic cable, that basically adds like a pseudo anti-aliasing to everything to smooth it out a bit. But it'd be nice to see if with the increased power, if there's room I'd rather have 60 FPS and a native resolution more than anti-aliasing, but if there's some headroom, I'd like some anti-aliasing in some of these games. But I mean, HMK said it earlier. One thing that's great about Nintendo is the art direction they take with their games doesn't inherently need like all the power in the world. I mean, yeah, they could do more with it, but like Breath of the Wild still to this day holds up.
Oh yeah.
Because of the art direction they went with. And you look at even recently, like they did the Bowser's Fury. Looks fantastic.
That it does.
You know, you even like look at some old games they brought back. You know, Mario Galaxy, put that in HD. Look how good that looks. Ooh. That was a Wii game. Even Mario Sunshine. 64. Even Mario Sunshine. Like,
I don't know, Mario Sunshine looked kind of rough to me.
It has some rough spot. It does, but like,
rough spots. It was more like gigantic rough patches, bro. Like, nah, Galaxy definitely.
Well, Galaxy always looked better, anyway.
That's what we can all agree on. But Sunshine, I don't know. Like, after seeing that in HD, I was able to see like, yo, this game is kind of ugly, bro. Like,
well, I mean, like, compared to Mario 64, then come say it's ugly.
I mean, like, bro, look, this is like Mario 64 was on the 64. You take a game like Wind Waker, which was also on the GameCube, and not even in HD, but you're to upscale that and like emulators and stuff. Wind Waker is miles better looking than.
Well, yeah, it's a cell shaded style too, which that goes. They go look at Killer 7 back in the day and stuff
what
like
Sunshine
that.
looked to me is that they took the models like from Mario Party 3, cleaned up a little bit, and just made a game out of it, bro. That. But Galaxy though is that looked too good. I'm like, bro, this is a Wii game, and seeing it on the Switch was just I don't know. The fact that it was like locked in 60 frames. Well, I mean, most Mario like all 3D Mario games aside from Sunshine, was they clocking at 60 frames. But seeing that on 1080p, 60 frames, like in this purest majesty, is like, bro, this is like testament to like Nintendo's idea of having these graphical styles. Like, look, that's a Wii game and it looks amazing on Switch years later. So,
yeah, I mean, technically, I think even like with Skyward Sword HD, looks really good. The only knock I will give is because Breath of the Wild had all that grass. That looks so gorgeous. To not have that in Skyward Sword HD, it's like, okay, I could tell this is an older game now because they set a new standard for what I expect foliage to look like in a Zelda game. So you go back to that and you're like, flat textures.
I mean, yeah.
No grass.
My problem with Skyward Sword, as much as I love Skyward Sword and I thought it looked amazing on the Wii, I thought it looked amazing on the Wii. And I just wish they just messed around a little bit more with the bloom and lighting effects in Skyward Sword. Because I'm like, okay, I understand 60. It's like the first 3D.
Well, 60 FPS. 60 FPS is huge.
Exactly. Yeah. That's impressive for a Zelda
3D Zelda game. Yeah.
That's not being messed around with emulators or like whatnot. That's impressive. But I mean, I still wish they would add some sort of like bloom or extra type of lighting that would just make it pop a little bit more something more along the lines of what we saw in Wind Waker HD. But
Wind Waker HD had a lot more work put into it for sure.
That was
they even redid some of the models. They added a first person mode that most people didn't even realize was there. Like they did a lot in that game. But that was also the thing about Wind Waker HD, because they didn't do that with Twilight Princess HD. They had a separate.
However, what they did with Twilight Princess HD, which I feel that's the only reason why I give Twilight Princess HD a pass, is that while they messed around with the models and the bloom effects of Wind Waker HD, in Twilight Princess HD, they messed around a lot with the textures, and I appreciate that because those textures went from A to like Z, bro. Like they put a lot of work into like redoing the textures. I'm like, okay, I appreciate that. A lot of people sandbag Twilight Princess HD because of like the lack of bloom effects, but I mean, like, bro, if you were to put like the walls and the floor and the details that you see in Twilight Princess against what you see in the Wii from the Wii U version, there is a massive.
What hurts Twilight Princess HD, and this is through no fault of Tantalus who did the port, because like, yes, they did a lot of texture work, but to be fair, fans have been doing retextures of Twilight Princess in emulators for years, so it's not something we haven't seen before. Like, if a fan can do it, of course, an actual development studio can.
You'd hope.
That's one reason why some people weren't as impressed. They're like, oh, dude, we've seen better texture packs on emulators. But what really didn't do it any service is, remember the Wii U tech demo for Zelda?
You just have to hurt me again, man.
I'm just saying that like people saw that clearly an evolution.
We were robbed.
Clearly an evolution of the Twilight Princess style, and then you're like, oh, Twilight Princess HD. Maybe they're gonna
That's what they wanted, because it was that tech demo and that stupid ass GameStop render that they man, like you know what render I'm talking about? Using the signs and stuff. I'm like, that's what we want, and yeah.
So like. That was one problem, I think, is that people are like, how could the Wii U tech demo look better than the H? It's like, well, because it's a completely different engine and it's just a tech demo. Yeah. And yes, all of us Zelda fans would love Twilight Princess remade like that, but it didn't happen. And the only reason the Wind Waker got as big of an update as it did is because it was done by the actual Zelda team, not a third-party studio, so not Grezzo, not Tantalus, and they were experimenting because they had never done HD development as a Zelda team before, and they wanted to try out a bunch of different techniques that they would later apply to Breath of the Wild. So there was a lot more experimentation done with the game to make it look that way. Like, they didn't have to replace character models. You just said, like, the Wind Waker just up-resed from GameCube looks good. Like, they don't need to put that much work in. But they did because they wanted to mess around with things to help teach the development team better techniques for Breath of the Wild, which obviously turned out pretty well because not only does the Wind Waker HD look fantastic, obviously Breath of the Wild does too. So that's one thing, though, that like that's like the one game the actual Zelda development team did. Like all the other remakes and remasters, like Link's Awakening, that was Grezzo. Majora's Mask 3D, Ocarina of Time 3D, that was Grezzo. You know, Twilight Princess HD is Tantalus. Skyward Sword HD, probably Tantalus again. Doesn't look like it's something that was a really high effort.
Right,
we know the Zelda team's doing Breath of the Wild 2. That's already been announced, so I doubt they paused Breath of the Wild 2 to be like, oh yeah, let's work on Skyward Sword HD. It's like, no, we could just hire somebody else to do that. Yeah. Heck, Grezzo maybe even did it for all we know. You know, I mean, Grezzo ported Miitopia over from 3DS, so. But yeah, like, I just think that the expectations for Switch Pro, you can keep them in check and still be excited. Like, this is not going to be like people that want them to go all out and have this be PS4 level, PS4 Pro level. Like, yeah, could they technically do that? Sure, the technology does exist, but in an affordable package with a battery life in handheld that can actually last a decent amount, you know, at least 3 hours, because they're not going to want to go lower than what the current Switch does. I don't think that really exists out there for them in that form. Now, you could talk about your phones and all that. None of us are sitting there. I mean, I'm not. I game on my phone, but dude, I watch like Netflix on my phone and it dies in like an hour and a half. So, or you just got to plug it in and start to recharge it, and that's an iPhone 12, so it's like a newer one. So like the battery drain on phones is horrendous. Everyone knows it. Like, it's one of the things that makes us replace our phones sometimes more often is, well, you know, you get a year in and your battery doesn't say charge for more than half a day and you're not even touching it. One. So that's what happens, and like they don't want that to happen to the Switch. They don't want you to get like a year into owning a Switch Pro and suddenly the battery life is shit and you're only getting a half hour on the go. Like, that's not a good look for them. So they are going to stick with like a 10-watt profile. They're going to stick with, I don't know, I mean, in dock mode, they could unlock that further. That kind of depends on, do they stick with the same cooling solution? I would like to see them decide to go with vapor chamber like phones and the Xbox does, because then they could really push it to like 25, 30 watts in dock mode if they want. But I think that's obviously wishful thinking because it costs a little more, and Nintendo's going to make this thing probably be $299. And I say this because a new report is out from Game Reactor in Europe that NVIDIA is apparently going to stop making the Tegra X1 chip that's currently in Switch at some point this year. It's going out of production. Now, I don't know if this is true, of course. It's just Game Reactor and their sources. They were trying to vet the information from Bloomberg with their own sources. It turns out their sources are backing up Bloomberg, but then also saying, oh, by the way, NVIDIA's internally, they're planning to stop making the Tegra X1 chip set entirely at some point this year. They're just done making it. So not specifically the Mariko version, the whole line. They're just done with Tegra X1. Now, that's interesting, obviously, because really the only any electronic selling right now that uses Tegra X1 is Switch. And it's selling by the millions. So it feels weird to just be like, oh, we're going to be done making it. Unless they're just done making it because Nintendo says, hey, we're going to actually like replace the Switch with the Switch Pro and just slide it in there at $299, like they did with the version 2 Switch and phased out the version 1 Switch. They're like, we're going to slide this thing in at the same price point. we'll talk about it, of course. We'll advertise it. So if current Switch owners want to upgrade, fine. But we're just not going to sell the old Switch anymore. Which, the curious thing there is what happens with the Lite, since that's the cheaper system that the Switch Pro doesn't really do anything about, because it's not, unless they have a Lite version too. I have no idea.
They could come up with an upgraded Lite version too.
I don't know. Well, what's also interesting is if you look at sales of Lite, I think Nintendo thought Lite was going to be huge in Japan. Mm-hmm. I literally think they thought, oh yeah, Japan loves handheld only gaming. Lite's going to be huge. $200 Switch.
Right.
The only time the Lite sold well in Japan is after the Switch sold out during the pandemic. And then they sold a shitload of Lites because that's all that was available.
Yeah.
Once the other Switch came back in stock, that's now back to leading in sales in Japan. So it's almost like people don't really want the Lite unless there's no other option.
Well, right.
Because I mean, the Switch could do both.
Right, exactly.
It's almost as if, yeah, they like their handheld gaming, but they kind of like having that option that they can put it on TV, even if they're not going to take advantage of that option very often. It's still like, but it's an option, so why wouldn't I want that option? And it's a bigger screen. Why wouldn't I want the bigger screen?
Again, to me, the Switch Lite kind of feels more like a introductory Switch for like kids.
Plus Joy-Cons,
like a 2DS.
Yeah, right. I hate pigeonholing it like that, but that's what it kind of feels like. It's more of a introductory Switch.
Well, and if you think about it, the Wedge 2DS, like, what a weird design. I get that it was super durable.
I saw that. I'm like, bro, that thing looks so
yeah, I do.
janky.
Yeah.
But I mean,
we got the Ocarina of Time one for my son, and I got the box sitting over there. I'm like, dude, that thing went out of production quick. That thing just tanked in the market. But then they came out with the 2DS XL, and that ended up doing pretty decent for people who we just don't care about 3D, but we want the same form factor.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So why not pay a little bit less for the same form factor and the same power as a new 3DS XL?
Right.
You know, but you think about it. Even with the new 3DS, they had the new 3DS and the new 3DS XL. They stopped making the new 3DS like that because people wanted the bigger screen version. Mm-hmm. Even though they had the swappable faceplates, which I think was a really neat idea. Unfortunately for Nintendo, which they probably thought it was going to make a lot of money with those swappable faceplates. Even in Japan, people wanted the bigger screen version, and that's what we're seeing with the Switch. Is like I don't think if this Tegra X1 stuff is true and they're done making it at some point this year, I'm sure they'll bank up enough to maybe get through the holiday. But you know, heading into 2022, I don't see like restocks of the Switch Lite coming. I think they might just say, hey, look, people aren't buying this thing anyways unless it's a last resort. Like I know we're in a pandemic, but if you happen to be at a Walmart or you happen to be at a Best Buy and you go to the Switch section, you'll find Switch Lites because no one's buying them. Mm-hmm. Everyone's waiting for the actual Switch to come back in stock. Like,
you won't find that Sword and Shield Switch Lite though.
Well, no. I mean, special editions. That's obviously that's a little bit of a different story. You know, special editions or whatever.
Yeah.
And if anything, that's going to make like those special edition like Switch Lites be like super valuable. Because there's not as many Switch Lites out there. So I think that might be like, do you guys think like, one, do you think they're actually going to be done making Tegra X1s? And two, if they are, like, are we done with Switch Lite? Like, is Nintendo just going to toss it in the garbage and say, hey, we tried it, didn't work out the way we thought, moving on?
My take is that, I think Nintendo kind of prides themselves with like having options on top of options, because I mean the Switch itself as a console is like, it has many options. They also want options for, like you said, like an introductory level Switch, something that kids want to have, when the kids won't be able to break and whatnot, especially with the whole Joy-Con trip situation. Imagine like a 6-year-old, taking the Joy-Cons out and just like, biting on them and whatever. They want to circumvent that. I'm sure that seems like a very trivial problem, but I mean, it's something that does apply well to like certain families or whatnot. But the whole deal with Tegra, like, with Nvidia getting rid of the Tegra chip, I just like when you see a situation like that, you would think off the bat, it's like, okay, yeah, they're getting rid of the Lite. Like, how are they gonna make the Lite? How are they gonna make the regular Switch? And then, like, okay, the Tegra is getting discontinued. That also, by default, possibly means a discontinuation of the Lite and the regular Switch. And then that sounds insane.
It's all the same, yeah.
Say that.
Right. It's like the best-selling system worldwide every month.
Why would you cripple it like that?
They can't even keep it in stock. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
exactly. So there's two. I feel there's two outcomes to that equation. One, that the Tegra thing going out of production is bullshit, or like that's one. 2 is that Nintendo apparently may have this back pocket plan to replace the chip with a similar, if not more powerful chip for their standard Switch and Lite in order to be like revision version 2. And then that has me thinking, I'm like, okay, that could be a possibility because you would think, oh, that would cost a lot of money in terms of production in order Nintendo to like shift everything to that, buy possibly a more expensive chip or a chip that does as well as the Tegra. But of course, if they're phasing out the Tegra, that means they have to opt for another chip that's not being phased out, thus being more expensive. And that idea is like, would Nintendo do that because that's more money? But then you go back and like, okay, the Switch is doing well enough, so they have the money to do that kind of stuff, to invest more back into the Switch, which will only may benefit them in the long run for having a slightly more powerful Switch in terms of the revision of the Lite and the regular Switch. But I mean, who else is going to notice something like that except the hardcore market?
I have
the casual market's not going to care.
I have a theory, and I didn't have this theory until the news broke about potentially the Tegra X1 going out of stock, and a realization is something. So NVIDIA had a hiring post up, hiring a senior developer for their Orin line, which is like their top of the line Tegra chip that doesn't come out till next year for smart cars, because there's a worldwide silicon shortage. That's one reason why we can't buy GPUs. Right now we can't buy PlayStation 5s readily.
Yeah, semiconductors, yeah. Yeah,
like the semiconductors and the silicon shortage. So what has happened is the car manufacturers are actually not having any slowdown in production. They're being prioritized for all the silicon and all the semiconductors because they just have bigger contracts with the factories and the production lines. So my theory was, when I saw that they were hiring the senior developer for the Orin chip, and in the senior developer hiring post it says for the purpose of smart cars and game consoles, it's like, okay, I don't know that Nintendo's crazy enough to go with the latest and greatest technology and just severely cut it back so it runs at 10 and 15 watts or whatever. But I'm like, but if they're having a hard time getting Tegra X1 chips because they're made on a 16 nanometer process that pretty much no other chip on the market uses anymore. Everything is under 16 nanometers now. It's all 12, 10, 8, and 7. They're even trying to get down to 5, but I don't think that's going to land for a few more years. So my thing is, since it's like the only 16 nanometer chip being made out there, it's not being made for cars. The semiconductors and the silicon are being prioritized for car chips. What if the whole idea here is, well, we can't get enough of these made anyways. We talked to NVIDIA. They tell us they have enough runoff from the chips they're making for the cars to be like, look, we have enough chips that don't hit the car specs, but can easily hit a spec that you would use at a lower wattage for Switch off these top-end ones that we're making now and focusing on and mass producing for cars for next year. What if, hey, look, we don't have any use for these chips because they don't meet spec for the cars? This happens, by the way, guys, with any new chips that come out. There's only like a 50% turnover rate on chips where they make it and actually hits the spec they need. Like, if you think about why is there the 3090, the 3080, the 3070, 3060? Well, they make all of the chips they make, they're trying to hit the top end, 3080, 3090, but sometimes they come out of the factory and they can't meet specifications and run at the clocks and the speeds that they need to. Sometimes some of the cores don't work correctly, mistakes on the manufacturing. So what do? They chop it down to where it meets a spec for a 3070. They chop it down so it meets a spec for a 3060. So technically they're all using like the same architecture and the same chip. It's just cut back because that chip couldn't hit the top speeds it needed to qualify for a higher class of card. So they don't. If all the car manufacturers are like, look, we want this Orin chip for all our smart car Teslas. We want the Orin chip for all our Teslas. But the turnover rate's only 50%. What happens to the other 50% of cards? Well, if NVIDIA's like, dude, Nintendo, you can have these for way cheaper because they don't meet the spec, and we're already mass producing these because the car manufacturers get the priority on the chips anyways, we can give you more of these than we could ever give you Tegra X1s. And if that's the case, then Nintendo might be like, well, then screw it. Why don't we just flip the switch and say, you know what, that could also, I know, right? That could also reinvigorate the market, which is already just balling. The Switch is peaking. Boom, we hit you with a more powerful one. Switch Lights, we're probably still going to stay in stock for a while anyways because they always make too many of them because they're not selling. And then they say, look, yeah, we're done making the OG Switch, and we're done making the Switch Lite. Now we just have this new one with the 720p OLED, and, it's basically the same form factor, no bezel. We're not switching out the Joy-Cons or anything, which would piss me off that they're not going to improve the Joy-Cons, but that's a whole nother story that, I don't know. Nintendo's got also all these lawsuits going on with it, and maybe they just factually don't want to fix the problem right now, because then it's admitting that there's a problem, and that hurts them in lawsuits. That's, people don't consider that Nintendo has a lot, like, there's even governments in Europe suing Nintendo over it. Like, they're in big trouble over these Joy-Cons, and if they actually make a better one, you got to kind of watch out for them kind of admitting that there's a problem and costing them, several hundred millions of dollars that Nintendo does not want to pay out to governments or out to consumers. That's why they've been offering these free Joy-Con repairs, kind of hoping that, people just forget about it. We'll fix them for free. Don't worry about it.
Sweep it under. Here's
kind of sweep it under. We know there's a problem. Well, no, we don't really know there's a problem. But hey, you know what? It's out of warranty. We'll fix it anyways. You're not going to complain, right? You're not going to join the class action lawsuits, right?
Yeah, right.
We're fixing it. We got it. Anyways, so my thing is, okay, if the Tegra X1s are going out, they're going to use fall-off chips from the car manufacturing lines. It kind of all lines up where maybe they could just get more of those chips than they can the X1 anyways, so they can produce more Switches anyways. And next thing you know, hey, they're meeting demand. It's more powerful. It's still at $299. They're not making as much profits at that level with all the new tech in it, but also, hey, it's going to fly off shelves. We still have a lot of the OG Switches to sell off to. Maybe we chop $50 off the price or something to kind of clear out that inventory. Keep the Switch Lite at $200 and say, screw it, we're not making any more Switch Lites right now. And then next year or the year after, you release, the Switch Lite Pro, or you guys know it's going to be called New Nintendo Switch, right?
New something.
It's going to be called New Nintendo Switch, or Switch XL, maybe, because it has a bigger screen.
The Switch U.
Maybe Switch Plus.
I know some people want it to be called Super Switch, which I think would be really cool. Or Switch Advance. There's better names.
Switch Blade.
But if you look at Nintendo, what's consistently they've been doing with handheld? XL and new. And it's XL and new. They used XL on the DS for the DS XL, and they used it on 3DS, so it could be called that, because it factually has a bigger screen. They could get away with calling it an XL.
Yeah.
And obviously XLs have always ended up being the top sellers for them anyways. Mm-hmm. And just... Because I look at it like this. Furukawa said they're only entering the halfway point of the Switch. I have a hard time thinking that this Switch in front of me right now, in 3 or even 2 years from now, is going to really be enough for the market. Obviously third-party support's going to fall off a little bit because, once they're done making cross-platform to PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, you're going to see more focus on those specs and less ability to get anything but indie games on here. But you start to look at it even from Nintendo's perspective, look, they're already not going to compete with power anyways, but they can do just enough to convince third parties that you should still support this thing because we're still moving 20 plus million a year. And now that we have this Pro version, well, guess what? 60 million that we sold before last year that bought the OG Switch or the version 1 Switch, guess what? They're going to want to upgrade. Mm-hmm. That's 60 more million sales over the next 2 years. Because people just want, oh man, I want that OLED. I want that 4K DLSS upgrade. I want 60 FPS Breath of the Wild 2.
Yeah, or it's enough of a boost to bring in a whole another extra 20 million.
Yeah, it's super speculative based on spotty information here and there. But it's kind of I can kind of see if you connect the dots, there might be something there where it's just they actually can make more of them because they're using a car chip versus using a chip that literally only their system uses. Because for those who don't know, the NVIDIA Shield TV that had the X1 in doesn't use it anymore.
Oh.
They've stopped making it for that. They stopped making the Shield TV. So
then that leads...
Literally, just Switch is the only thing using it.
Honestly, then leaning more towards they would be...
So what are your guys' thoughts? I'll be right back. I got to take a phone call. Yeah. But you guys keep going here. And then I guess I'll leave you with this thought process. Off that crazy idea, do you guys think there's any possible validity to any of this? Because right now, there's just so much out there, but so little of it do we know because Nintendo is doing what Nintendo does and kind of deny, stay silent, we're not going to say much, and then they're just going to drop it whenever they feel like dropping it.
Not for sure. Go ahead, HMK.
All right. what I think about this is that, I feel there's some sort of validity to the whole notion of a Switch, of a next Switch next. That's what I'm gonna call it, new Nintendo Switch, whatever. I think there's validity to it because, we're reaching a point in the Switch's life, like he said earlier, that it's claimed that we're 4 years in and we're going to have another 4 years because it's like, halfway throughout its lifespan. It's going to need something in order to keep it fresh. I mean, like, the Switch has had a strong 4 years. But now as time keeps going after that amazing first year in 2017, and 2018 was a pretty good year, 2019, as time is going, years and years, like, keep getting darker in terms of, like what's new, what they have a plan specifically for the Switch. I'm not the type of person to complain about ports, but at the same time, the more ports we have makes me wonder is like, okay, what does Nintendo have new in the tank? And something like really tells me like it's been this kind of journey Nintendo's been taking, like maybe after the first year or two, or maybe even three, that Nintendo's been experimenting with something that they want to, do more with the Switch. And that I remember there was an interview not so long ago that Kazumi, I think, was saying that they would like to see what they can do with the family of Nintendo Switch products. Right. At the time he was probably, only talking about the regular Switch and the Switch Lite. But I mean, I felt that was like the first big hint that really put into perspective, to me at least, that, Nintendo's like looking towards a higher end version of this console, which is like, of course, the base, which is like the base of everything. Lite was something on the lighter end, and then whatever they have in store beyond that is going to be the bigger end. I like, like Prime said, I really don't believe that, people are expecting this to be like the next gen or the next thing or the next huge thing. It's like, no, it's just, the next step for this specific gen that the Nintendo Switch, has its identity under. And, all this considered, I feel that this, of course, it's coming out of Bloomberg, I forget, Mazuch, I butcher his name, but, like, he has a track record and stuff, and he's not going to sacrifice that just because, he wants to entertain, people that constantly talk about the Switch.
No,
Switch
or
Switch Pro.
Sure. Yeah, no.
So I think there's validity to it, yeah.
Oh, for sure. I definitely believe that there's some validity to it. And actually, to touch on your family of systems, they were even saying family of systems before the Lite came out, if I remember correctly.
Right.
So that kind of adds to speculation, of course, that something, I don't think they're going to call it a family of Swiss systems if it's going to just end at two different types of systems. So
well, I also don't think that, like... So I have a theory that the version 2 Redbox Switch, okay, I don't think they would have ever even announced it if Switch Lite didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Like, right. Let's think about it. Why does that chip exist? Everyone thinks, because of the Switch Lite. No, because the first Switch had a major hardware issue that made it super easy to hack. And Nintendo was pissed. Because that hardware issue was a known issue with Tegra X1 that NVIDIA never told Nintendo about.
Ew.
So, like, Nintendo's like, oh, shit, we got to do something. So, let's, like NVIDIA, you got to fix this. Like, I understand you had all these chips sitting around, and it might have been cheap for us, but, okay, let's clear those chips out and get something, let's update this and fix that security issue, which they did. And I think that would have just been like any other system. If you look at every major console platform out there, they have chip swaps all the time for security reasons, and we never hear about it. It's never news.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could hear about it in like, the doldrums if you're paying attention to like data mines of like OSs and stuff. But for the most part, there's no the version 2 Switch isn't more powerful. Does it better battery life? Supposedly. I've had the version 1 and the version 2. I don't really notice much of a difference in the battery life.
Yeah.
It's just not a noticeable difference for me. So it's kind of like, I don't think there would even be a red box Switch if it wasn't for the fact that, okay, Switch Lite's coming out. So since Switch Lite's coming out, we might as well just say, hey, look, we also have a new... And what do they do with that? The old white box Switch gone. Done with it. So that's kind of like my thing. Like, as much as like... Because with 3DS, they ran, 2DS, 3DS, new 3DS, 3DS XL. They ran all those systems together for a while. But I just wonder, we're in a different time with a different CEO who is very data oriented and very business oriented. And I just think he looks at the data and he says, hey, if we just swap out the current Switch for a Pro at the same price, how's that? I mean, that's not going to hurt the market.
Right. And even if they do switch out, which, because, I mean, with you saying that the Switch is the only thing that ever really, I mean, only thing that actually uses the Tegra X1. And that would make sense why NVIDIA would want to discontinue that and stuff like that. But it also, looks good to Nintendo if they say, look, even we have this top-of-the-line chip in it, even though if you look under the hood, they're not using it to its fullest potential.
Oh, not even close.
Right. But they can claim they have it in there, and people that don't look into it that closely just recognize the name of the chip. They're like, oh, it's got this chip in it. It's so much better. You can actually, I don't want to say fool people, but to a certain extent, fool people into thinking it's so much better because it has the better name brand in it.
So let's get to the bottom line. Are we getting a Switch Pro this year?
Yes.
I think so.
Think it's going to come this year? You don't think they're going to wait till like spring, possibly?
No. Well, because it's weird because of the whole situation with the world right now in the pandemic, right? Like, it makes you think. I'm like, yo, Xbox, like PlayStation and Xbox, they didn't wait, and then you would think, why would Nintendo?
And to be fair, like we talk about how like PlayStation and Xbox can't keep up with the demand. Do people not remember how every console launch goes,
right.
even before
Generally,
the pandemic? Yeah. Like, do you guys remember the Wii?
PS3. Yeah, the Wii and the PS3. I remember there was a dude, it made news that a dude traded a PS3 for a BMW. That's how scarce it was.
Wow.
Like, the guy really wanted a
launch,
PS3 and he traded a BMW for it. Yeah, around launch time, of course. Yeah.
And like, if you look at the sales, like we know what the launch sales were for PlayStation 5 was $4.5 million, which is exactly what they sold for PlayStation 4 at launch, which wasn't during the pandemic. So like, I look at it as, okay, yeah, the pandemic plays a role, but also this is what happens at every console launch. So what the hell, like, is there really that big of a shortage, or is it just hello? The demand isn't slowing down because, the demand is a little bit higher than other console launches just because there's people at home. Mm-hmm. So, sure, if they would have made $7 million at launch, maybe they would have sold $7 million, unlike previous generations. But at the same point, I don't think they're really making systems at a lower rate than any other time. I just think the demand is technically a little bit higher just because people are at home. And I think there's a lot of OG PS4 owners that did not buy a Pro that were holding out for the next gen. Too. That kind of is a thing I think that was happening too. Because I know some people on PlayStation 4 that were debating on the Pro, but like, oh, but PlayStation 5's got to be around the corner. Like, we'll just wait for the PlayStation 5. So we kind of think it's going to come this year then.
Part of it, I think, also depends on Breath of the Wild 2 development too. Because if it's not...
do we think Breath of the Wild 2 is tied to it?
Yes. I absolutely...
And it is the 35th anniversary of Zelda this year. Granted, they're probably going to run the celebration through March 31st of next year like they did with Mario.
Right.
But
or later, depending on when they actually fully start the celebration. You know what I'm saying?
So do we think Breath of the Wild 2
is in May?
So do we think Breath of the Wild 2 is coming this year then?
Yes.
I could see it as a holiday game.
God.
Well, okay, because some people are like, oh, the pandemic. I'm like, well, yeah, but they've been making this game since the end of 2017. Pandemic wasn't, I mean, they're just using the same engine. So, like, it shouldn't take as long. It shouldn't take 5 years to slap this game together, even with the pandemic. So,
like, a big theory of mine is that I really think the reason why they're not showing anything is because it's not because they don't have anything to show. It's literally just waiting from they're waiting for the okay from Nintendo. It's like, listen, we need this game to help sell the Pro or the Plus or whatever the fuck.
Yeah, you can't tell me that they could show us a full-on cutscene trailer in 2019, and they have nothing to show.
Yeah, that's
2 years later.
They have something to show.
There's no way. They clearly
they're just waiting.
Even that cutscene trailer, there was more. They have more done. They didn't just make that cutscene trailer and there was no other game. They obviously they have a lot more they could show. I think one thing that might be happening And this is just a kind of my own little Zelda theory brain going on. Two things. From a logical perspective, they don't want Breath of the Wild 2 to overshadow Skyward Sword HD and potentially make people not buy that game, because people might not know this. Skyward Sword HD means a lot to Eiji Aonuma and Shigeru Miyamoto. So Shigeru Miyamoto kind of stepped away from Zelda for a while after kind of checking in on Majora's Mask a little bit, but he didn't really have anything to do with it. He was just kind of being like, hey, you have X amount of time to get it done. You get it done in this time. I like what I see. We'll go with it. After that point forward, Eiji Aonuma kind of ran things. And while, yeah, I think there were some games I think Twilight Princess, Shigeru Miyamoto was listed as executive producer or whatever, but he didn't do anything. They
probably just asked him questions.
Well, they said this in like an I Wanna Ask that like, yeah, I'd look at a build like once every 8 months.
Right. Yeah.
He really had nothing. He really had nothing to do with it besides making sure the game was actually being made, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, so like
call it a producer.
So it was still, and obviously Eiji Aonuma's gone from director into the producer role, and then Miyamoto really hasn't. But for Skyward Sword, Miyamoto came back into an active development role on that game. I think because of the motion controls in particular. Because Miyamoto was the one who pushed for motion controls in the first place. So I think he came back to make sure that was done right. And then, obviously, they decided that this was going to be one of the most story-intensive games in Zelda and be the game that sets up the whole timeline. So it became this highly important game that Nintendo was extremely disappointed that it did not sell well. They thought this was going to be another Twilight Princess, another 8 million seller. Didn't even hit that halfway point of that. So, like...
It was around that. It was like,
yeah, it was like 3.5, 4 million. Yeah, it was right. Yeah. So it's like, that's not what they thought on a 100 million selling system. A Zelda game did that, and that don't sound right. But again, that's the cliff that Furukawa's been talking about. Sales of the Wii were way the hell down, and technically, I don't know if people realize this, Wii U was announced to E3 before Skyward Sword released.
Yeah.
So, like, why is anyone buying a new game after you just announced a new system?
True. Yeah, they really shut themselves.
And they announced it because the Wii had already started to stop selling. So, like, basically 2010 was the last time the Wii did any sort of decent numbers. Heading into 2011, it really fell off a cliff, and thought, okay, we better announce the next system. Why did you wait for the cliff fall? They should have just delayed Skyward Sword and made it on Wii U. That I think they learned that lesson. That's why they did it with Breath of the Wild. Said, no. Yeah. Wii U is tanking. We're spending $200+ million on this game. We are not releasing this. We're not making a Skyward Sword situation, but worse. Not doing that. We don't want this game we think is epic, but then like we're leaving it to die. Granted, it might not have died. They could have ported it to Switch like Mario Kart 8 did, and then just blew the hell up too. So it still might have did okay. But I think it made a lot of sense to hype up new hardware with, hey, look, we've been hyping this Zelda game for how many years, since 2014? Like, come over and buy a Switch. And right. Wii U owners, we're not forgetting you. We're releasing it the same day, but it's gonna be limited run because there's not that many Wii U's. We don't really care.
Right.
I mean, dude, for a time at launch, there were more Switch copies of Breath of the Wild sold than Switches. Because Switch was sold out, but Breath of the Wild wasn't. So people kept buying the game knowing they were going to buy a Switch to play it.
At one point, I will play this game.
Yeah. I am going to play this game. I just need it in my hands right now, even though I can't play it yet.
Yeah.
For whenever I get a Switch. Whether I buy it online or buy it in store, I already have the game I want to play. So for Breath of the Wild 2, clearly I think they're further along than people might realize, even with the pandemic. I wonder if, so you have the Skyward Sword HD situation where that game feels important to Miyamoto and Eiji Aonuma, so they don't want it to be overshadowed. And two, there were Skyward Sword references in Breath of the Wild.
Bro, over the place, man.
But, we never really got anything from it. Like, the sword talked. Okay. The sword talked, but nothing really happened in-game with it, which made me feel like they're teasing something for Breath of the Wild 2 is happening with the goddamn Master Sword. Yep. Something's happening. And I wonder if they want people to fully gross in, like, all these Breath of the Wild players that didn't understand those references, because Breath of the Wild is the most popular Zelda game ever. So many of these players haven't played any other Zelda game. So, like, we want these players to hop in, play Skyward Sword, get the story, understand some bit, and then we hit you with Breath of the Wild 2, which might build on, maybe Demise is back, maybe Girahim's back. Maybe Fi is back because after all, the sword factually talked, and we know that's Fi. If you play Skyward Sword, you know what that reference is.
Yep.
But it just nothing actually happened from like, did the sword just talk? Well, yes, the sword just talked. What's going on? And then nothing happened. Like it talked, but that's it. They didn't go any further than that.
Because that was all part of the plan, man. Nintendo knows what they're doing.
They know what they're doing. They knew when they made Breath of the Wild. There was a plan for Breath of the Wild 2 when Breath of the Wild was made, guys.
Oh yeah,
yeah, definitely, absolutely.
And especially if you guys got the true ending. I don't know if how many of you guys got the true ending, but if you get, because there's like 2 endings. It's really weird. There's 2 endings in a Zelda game. What? And then there's the DLC ending on top. So, but like you get the true ending, you know there's more. It very clearly was like the adventure ain't done. Yeah, you stopped the calamity. That's great. There's more. Yeah. Zelda made it very, very clear. There's more issues going on. We ain't done. The legend has more. But yeah, we're going to walk off into the sunset for now. It's like, okay. Like, Nintendo almost never ends a Zelda game on a cliffhanger because they almost, every time they make one, they stand alone. We don't necessarily plan for there to be sequels. But then there's a sequel.
Right.
Like, the only other game they did that with, that they clearly planned for there to be a sequel, was Wind Waker. They ended Wind Waker by saying, okay, you guys need to go off and find New Hyrule. They planned for there to be a Wind Waker 2 before that got nixed, and then they went and made Twilight Princess. Obviously, we ended up eventually getting Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks that followed it up and ended up in New Hyrule anyways. But they were, like, factually, the Wind Waker 2 was in the works. Eiji Aonuma was working on the Wind Waker 2. And then it was, I forget, it was the president of Nintendo America at the time, or something like that.
Yeah, he was all like, nah, bro.
He's like, dude, no, dude. The American audience was not into this, man. Like, and that's your biggest audience for Zelda. Let's nix that. We got to go with something more Ocarina of Time like. And then we got Twilight Princess, which was fine. Twilight Princess was a good game. Sold really, phenomenal. It was the best-selling Zelda game until
Breath of the Wild.
So
and it was like, see, we know. Like,
yeah. and then of course, Eiji Aonuma being what he is, like, well, I'm not giving up on the sequel idea. We'll just put it on the DS and do Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, which was fine. Those games are good. Even though Phantom Hourglass is my least favorite Zelda game of all time, I still don't think it's a bad game. I'll always remember the folding the DS puzzle. I mean, that was... So many people got stuck at that, because like, there's no other game that makes you put your DS into sleep mode to complete a puzzle. Yeah. Like, no one's thinking, why would I put my DS into sleep mode? So people would find it out by accident because they were frustrated. I can't figure this damn thing out. They close their DS, they come back, wait, it's stamped? What? Huh?
That's like that one Pokemon that you need to flip your DS over in order to evolve.
Yeah,
and
like who would ever think of that?
Man, what the heck?
Like, it's such a weird but it was really cool. Like, it's one of those aha moments. Like, I didn't know you could do that. I thought it was just sleep mode. I didn't know you could do a gameplay mechanic with that. So like, okay, so we think Breath of the Wild 2 is coming with the Switch Pro, or at least they're planning to maybe make that like a launch, a quote unquote launch game. Guys, it's going to come to the original Switch. Don't worry about that. They're not leaving the 80 million, 90 million Switch owners behind. It might run at a better frame rate and stuff like that on the Switch, but it's still going to... The way Breath of the Wild plays today on Switch, if you're okay with that, that's probably what Breath of the Wild 2 is going to play like. Which I think most people are perfectly fine with it. So, cool. But definitely a way to push new hardware for the holidays. The reason that I asked is because if we thought Breath of the Wild was because there's been like reports that maybe it was delayed, which I find reports of delays funny since there's no release date.
Yeah, right.
I mean, yeah, maybe internal delays, but since when do we hear about internal delays?
Especially when there's not a
like the only time you hear about internal delays is here's the rule of thumb with Zelda games. If Nintendo gives you a release date that's a year out, it's getting delayed.
Yeah.
Every time they like example, Breath of the Wild. They said when it was revealed at E3 2014, this game is coming out in 2015. Yeah, it's getting delayed. It's getting delayed. If you look at the history of Zelda games, when they give you a date that's a year out, no. At least go a year past that. At least go a year past. But they purposely haven't given us a date, because I think what we found out with Nintendo lately is they like to announce, give it to you in a few months. Announce, give it to you in a few months.
They've been doing that very recently, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a new strategy for them. Like, look, we're not going to promise until... Dude, this game's done. It went gold. Now we'll tell you. It's gold now.
Technically not a delay if there's never been a release date established.
So my thought process was, they don't... Okay, so Right now, Pokemon Legends Arceus is scheduled for early 2022. So you would figure that's coming before the end of the fiscal year. Nintendo wants it out before the end of the fiscal year. They want it to be their Animal Crossing next year, where they released Animal Crossing before the end of the fiscal year this year for last year. So that's an open world game. I don't think they want Breath of the Wild and Pokemon Legends next to each other in a release slate. I don't think that's good for the Pokemon company.
But the thing is, it's gonna like that's the whole argument of like, you know, disposable income, because I mean, like, it's Pokemon, it's gonna sell,
but it's
like,
also
you know,
time.
Yeah, I know,
time.
but I mean, like, even
so my point,
time and stuff like that.
My point was that that almost supports them releasing Breath of the Wild this holiday, so that you get a 3-month break until Legends. You know, kind of.
Oh yeah, definitely. Then, yeah.
That's what I was saying. Like, because some people say, well, Breath of the Wild 2 will come out in the spring. You know, release on March 3rd, like the anniversary, and it's like, okay, but like if Pokemon Legend comes out around the same time, they're two really big open world games. I feel like Nintendo will want some space between those games, because people that play it are going to sink hundreds of hours in. You're going to want to like give people who want both the time to actually enjoy both. And plus, again, space out sales. You know Breath of the Wild 2 is going to sell at least 10 million. At least half.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I mean, if you look at the history, like Galaxy 2 sold at least half of Galaxy 1. So it's like, they're going to sell at least 10, which would be the second best selling Zelda game ever. So they know those sales are guaranteed. Released during the holiday period. Last Zelda game didn't come out during the holiday period. So maybe 10 million's under. That might be 10 million just during the holidays. Who the hell knows?
Right.
I mean, I really don't know. I think the moment they show Breath of the Wild 2, it might end up being the most hyped video game of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, it will be for me. Breath of the Wild was for me when I played it at E3 2016. I mean, it was game over there. I already knew when I played that demo. I'm like, holy shit, they got it right. What even is that? That was just like, remember me at E3 when I said, this might be the greatest Zelda game I've ever played, and this is just the opening area
demo? Yeah.
of a demo.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Like, just this area alone. Holy shit.
Right.
So it's like, Breath of the Wild 2, when they finally announce it, and as long as it looks good, and especially if it's got some hardcore references to Skyward Sword that just came out, or you know, whatever, Link's Awakening, since they just did, you know, they just had that remake come out, you know, in 2019. Like, dude, people are going to be so hyped. So, I think I'm leaning... See, I was originally thinking maybe they delay it. But you know what? I think the stars are aligning for Switch Pro this holiday.
Yeah.
Now, I want to touch on this briefly before we wrap things up. Going a little off topic from Nintendo here. Microsoft and Bethesda's deal. It's really Microsoft and ZeniMax, to be fair. The deal is finalized. Europe approved it. The United States approved it. That's the only territories that really mattered for them to get this deal done. Because that's where all the studios are located between the US and Europe. Or North America and Europe.
Yeah.
So, Phil Spencer came out after it was done. He said, look, the deal's final. And yes, there's a lot of games are going to be exclusive. Because Phil Spencer before said, well, you know, we'll play it by ear. But the deal wasn't done yet. And he even said, we can't talk about their games until the deal's done. The deal's done. The ink is dry. They have signed the papers. So, what do you guys think about this ZeniMax deal? Because this has been a kind of a big point of controversy coming back to the forefront. Because I think there were some fans hoping that the deal would get nixed by one of the governments. Didn't happen. So, like, what do you guys think? See, I own all the systems. I own a Series X, a PlayStation 5, and a Switch. So, like, to me... But all Bethesda games are basically going to be on Game Pass, which just made my gaming much cheaper. Because I don't have to buy the games at $60 a pop. I could just... They're already there on Game Pass, a service I already pay for. So for me, I'm like, God, you know, as a game reviewer, as like a game guy who streams, like, this is great for me. But I play on everything. At least I do this gen. This is the first gen I think I've owned all the consoles.
At least for a while.
Oh, well, no, you see, I've had Xbox and like Nintendos before, and gaming PCs, but... I've never I never really deep dove into Sony before. It's my first time owning like Sony platforms super early and trying to get into the Sony games. So, what are you guys' thoughts overall on this deal? Because my thought process is, well, Microsoft had to do something because they've been locking up studios for a bit, and now they legitimately have a claim that, hey, in the Microsoft ecosystem, which includes PC, xCloud, and Xbox, we'd actually now legitimately have a shitload of exclusive games. that people care about. Between all those studios plus the prior studio, the studio makes Hellblade. Like, they have all these. Like, granted, we haven't seen the fruit of these studios yet, but it's gonna come. I mean, imagine, think about this, guys. Skyrim's on everything, right?
Yeah.
Literally on everything. We've seen it run on Alexa, for crying out loud. Amazon Alexa. It was kind of a joke, but still. Skyrim's on everything. Elder Scrolls 6 ain't going to be on everything.
Nope.
You want it, you better get Game Pass, or own a PC, own an Xbox, or get into their cloud service. So, like, what do you guys think about this deal? Obviously, for Microsoft, it's mostly all good news. Microsoft shits $7.5 billion. They're one of the most richest companies in the world. That's like 1/4 of revenue for them.
Right.
So, like, what do you guys think about this deal? Like, do you think it's a good thing? Are you excited? Like, is there hope that maybe Microsoft can kick Bethesda in the butt and get them to stop having the same bugs in every single game? Because that's like a bugaboo about Bethesda games, is all the Fallouts have all the same bugs. All the Elder Scrolls games have all the same bugs because they keep using the same engine and they don't patch it. But yet the games keep selling like crazy. So I don't know. Like, what do you guys thought? Like, guys, guess what? You want to play Doom? You're probably not getting the next Doom on Switch, guys.
Oof.
We got Doom Eternal on Switch. Big undertaking. Probably not happening anymore. Not going to get the next Wolfenstein. Any hope that you were going to get another Skyrim game on Switch ain't going to happen, unless, of course, a deal is struck to xCloud on Switch.
Right.
That's something that's a down the line thing, because xCloud isn't fully launched right now. So,
yeah.
Right.
Anyways, what are your guys' thoughts? I'm kind of indifferent since I own everything, so it doesn't really affect me.
Well, honestly, to me, I don't know if I really play a whole lot of Bethesda games. I don't really game a whole lot anyway. So to me, it doesn't really have a whole lot of effect on me.
But what do you think? Like, so the big controversy is basically mostly PlayStation fans, because even like Nintendo fans aren't as mad because we haven't really been getting these games until the Switch, anyways.
Right, and it does seem like out of the the other two competitors to Microsoft themselves, they're a little bit closer to Nintendo. So the chances of, if they aren't going to go exclusive to Xbox, the next logical step would be possibly allowing Switch to have something.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not even worried about Switch getting anything. I don't think it's going to happen. I think all the games are going to be made in the future, like, exclusively for Series X and their cloud service. And PC, of course. One thing I think here is that, to put context to this, it's basically PlayStation fans that are pissed off, because all these games have been multi-platform forever, since the dawn of time. And now they're not. And they seem to be the ones that are super salty because they don't want to have to get into xCloud streaming. They don't want to go into a streaming service. They don't want to have to buy another console or have to, get a decent gaming PC. And most of them aren't even willing to consider xCloud on an Android phone, because they just don't even want to consider console gaming on a phone. Even if it runs well, they don't even want to think about it. So that seems to be the stemming here, is just PlayStation fans are really pissed off, which personally I find it to be a little ironic when you have, while Sony's not necessarily buying massive studios, they have bought some. Well, they get games like Final Fantasy 15 exclusive.
Well, not just that, but how many times has Sony fans rubbed the faces of?
Oh, we have all the exclusives.
We have all the exclusives. We have all the exclusives.
Oh, Sony fans have been rubbing Xbox fans' face, and we have the best exclusives. You're irrelevant besides Halo and Gears. Nobody cares about
that
you.
The tables are turning.
And then obviously, like, Nintendo can match us with exclusives, but we also get all the third-party games. So, like, we're technically the best platform for gamers. And now it's kind of like, dude, Microsoft made a power play.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what now? Like, what are you guys' thoughts on this? Do you guys even care? I mean, I have a multi-platform game right now, so to me, it's kind of, I don't care about console wars, but I find it interesting that I could kind of feel for people that were like, dude, I was saving up for a PlayStation 5. I played Doom Eternal. I was looking forward to Elder Scrolls 6. We've been looking forward to Elder Scrolls 6 for like over a decade, and now I don't get it on my platform. So what are you guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, go for it, HMK.
Like, the thing is, like, for Bethesda games specifically, I was never really, invested in those games.
Sure.
Or not, like, Elder Scrolls, Doom, all that good jazz, Fallout, blah, blah, blah. I was never really invested in that. But, I saw all the discourse between, like, the console war fanboys and whatnot. And I'm like, every time I see that on my social media feed, I'm like, bro, console wars have been dead for years, and then they keep trying to one up each other and stuff. And this move that happened with Xbox, with Microsoft, buying out Bethesda, like people really out here thinking that corporations, the loyalty of corporations, whether it be Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, whatever, they think they're rewarded for their loyalties in terms of like thinking that these corporations are your friends.
No,
and
none of them are.
At the end of the day, they're not your
none
friends.
of them are.
None of these.
All of them are trying to
your
find a
friends.
way to make the most money out of your wallet.
The bottom dollar, right? So it's all about like
But Game Pass, it's your friend. It makes things cheap. I'm like, no, they're looking at Game Pass as the next Netflix. They're looking to dominate.
With the whole notion of I should be rewarded for my loyalty. I'm like, good stuff, man. You bought this console thinking that Elder Scrolls 6 or that other game that they're like the space version of.
Oh yeah, God, what's that called? It's a really big game. It's a new IP. Starfield. Yeah, Starfield. Yep.
Yeah. Whatever. Now that the fact that now that apparently these games might end up being like 75 or not, if not even like 90%, exclusive to Xbox now.
Yep.
This is that, it's all this point of contention of competition in which these consoles is. I'm sure there's like, I keep on saying this whole idea that the whole notion of console wars is dead, but that doesn't mean that these companies still can't compete against each other, but in different ways.
Well, they're competing for your time, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, they're competing for your time and your bottom dollar, your disposable income. That's what they're competing for at this point. But they're no longer competing for best specs. They're not competing for like
they're not slapping each other down in the commercials like the Nintendo days. The Sega versus Nintendo days when they were just trashing each other. They all like look for different audiences at this point. The last I keep saying the last true vanguard of like what people perceive a console from like maybe 10 years ago is PlayStation. It's like people they claim it to be the best place for gamers, a console to play your games the best way possible for your TV. That's PlayStation. When you have Nintendo Switch, you have a hybrid console, something you take on the go, something that you can plug in at home, something that could I would say cover the field of most ages when it comes to like up and coming gamers, older gamers, something that applies to most of the market. Then you have Xbox, the whole deal with Microsoft. You could play your games on Xbox. You could play it on, Game Pass. On they're looking at like games it's like games as a service.
Exactly.
Games as a service is what they're doing. It's options.
Exactly. The big three are looking at different perspectives of times. And then there's a lot of gamers on social media that really don't get that. And they're like, the console wars have been dead. However, that doesn't mean that they don't compete for your disposable income. What they're competing now is by showing you, hey, listen, we can offer this instead of, this is the best console. It's like, no, this console can offer you this type of experience, right? So now with Xbox buying Bethesda, they're trying to bring that legendary developer into their fold and tell them like, hey, listen, now that these games are going to be here, there's what else Xbox can offer or whatnot. These games are going to be built for Xbox, not like the whole perspective, the paradigm shift that people need to look at is that these games are going to be built best for the console, not being built to be the best game there is. And people miss that because they keep on thinking that every game I should play should be built to be the best game ever. No, it's being built to be the best experience on this specific platform, and that's what Bethesda is going to be doing for the Xbox console. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really rub me the wrong way at all. There's corporation, there's corporate businesses, corporate competition, corporate tactics, and whatever. But seeing people getting salty about it, I'm like, bro, where have you been for like the past 1 year?
I also think it's I also think it was clearly smart for Microsoft. They needed a bigger splash in the studios they were getting. They needed to get a bunch of big IPs in. And they got a bunch of IPs that I think mesh really well with the kind of IPs they've been making. Very Western games.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas, what's Sony doing? Well, they're locking in Demon Souls Remastered, right? They're locking in a remake, I guess. So they're locking in things like Final Fantasy 15. Like, while Sony appears, unfortunately, from a marketing perspective, to have abandoned the Japanese audience, they haven't abandoned the Japanese developers that make games that sell really well in the West. And those are the deals they're locking in. Final Fantasy VII Remake's up. Locking it in. They are very clearly know what they're doing. And here's the thing. I don't think this deal is going to hurt PlayStation sales for anyone who's worried about it. I think one thing we have to remember, because I understand there's going to be some Sony fans that bought a PlayStation 5, hoping this deal wasn't going to go through. They bought it for the Sony exclusives, but they were kind of hoping they could still play their Dooms and their Fallouts and the next, Starfield and all this stuff. They were hoping they could play that. Here's the thing. One thing that we don't talk about very often, gaming is an expensive hobby.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very expensive hobby. It's always been an expensive hobby. It's not like people look at it as, well, dude, we're a one-income family. I work at Subway. I can't afford all this stuff. It's so unfair. It's like, well, then maybe you shouldn't be into a gaming hobby then, because it's too expensive. Or if you want to be in a gaming hobby, guess what? You're going to have multiple systems if you want to play all this stuff. Or you're going to have to make compromises, like being willing to use xCloud on your phone. Like, there's so many options to game. All three major console manufacturers are giving you all these different options. And yes, I don't expect any of you guys to be like me. I have a gaming PC. I have the latest Series X. I have the PlayStation 5 and the Switch, and I'll get a Switch Pro when it comes out. I technically, this laptop on camera here can game as well. Like, I don't expect people to be all, iPhone 12. I have all the latest tech like I do. But I'm also a YouTuber. Okay? I kind of cover this stuff. It makes if I wasn't a YouTuber, I would just own a Switch and a gaming PC. But I'm a YouTuber, and my YouTube income affords me to partake in other parts of the gaming industry that maybe I couldn't afford to. We need to understand, guys, that gaming is expensive. $70 games on PlayStation 5. Nintendo rarely dropping MSRP of their games, charging you $60 a pop. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Microsoft, they have games as a service, but you want any third-party games that aren't on it, you're still going to have to pay $60, $70 a pop. And you might end up spending more money on that games as a service, which is what Microsoft is hoping, than you would have annually buying games. So, in the end, they're all just nickel and diming you and trying to get all the money they can in a hobby that's built on being expensive.
Yep.
This isn't like a book. You go into a store, you spend $30, you might read that book for a month. That's not the case with games. You're spending $60, $70 a pop, plus you got to spend $300, $400, $500 to buy a piece of hardware to do it with. Or a gaming PC, God forbid. Those are stupidly expensive. So I think this is a situation where gamers, yes, it sucks if you own PlayStation systems and you wanted these games. Guess what? You're going to have to buy an Xbox. Or you're going to have to use xCloud. Or you're going to have to accept playing it on a PC. That's just the way it is, and it's kind of too bad, so sad. It's kind of like people who've been begging Nintendo to go third-party forever so they can get Nintendo games on their Xboxes, and that's not happening. You see how well Switch is selling? Nintendo ain't changing.
Right.
They ain't giving their games to PC. They ain't giving their games to you guys.
Right.
Because that's what makes their system sell. So you kind of have to accept the forest and the trees that are in it. This is how the gaming industry works. So I'm not saying that you guys can all afford to be multi-platform gamers. Of course not. I'm privileged to be able to be one. But at the same point, this is the hobby you're in. If you want to partake in all of it, you're going to have to set money aside to pull it off. Or just be happy with what you got. Does Sony not give you enough exclusives to be happy? I mean, granted, I know PlayStation 5 really only has Demon's Souls and Astro Boy at the moment for exclusives. But in the future, you think there's not going to be enough exclusives to make you happy on PS5? You think now that you own an Xbox Series X and you guys get mad about Final Fantasy 15 or whatever, you think, well, now they just spent $7.5 billion to give you exclusives. Mm-hmm. You think there's not going to be enough to satisfy you now? As a Switch owner, are you not satisfied with what Nintendo's delivered? And the partnerships they made. I mean, we talked about Breath of the Wild 2 and a little bit about Pokemon Legends coming out. Hell, we didn't even touch on the fact that we have, the Pokemon Diamond and Pro remakes this year. We have Metroid Prime frickin' 4 coming.
Oh,
Bayonetta 3. We had some big games coming, folks. And this is just the games we know about. Mm-hmm. I didn't know we were getting a Mario Golf Super Rush with an RPG mode when I was a kid.
Right.
Who the hell knew that was coming?
Right.
I mean, I know some of you guys might care. Mario Sports games, everyone cares about it. But I usually don't care about Mario Sports games either. But the moment they said the RPG
for sure,
single player, I was like, wait a second now. Hold up. So, Skyward Sword Ichi, here's the thing. Be happy with what you have. And just be happy that you have it. Because I remember times in my life, I had nothing. Literally nothing. I had to sell all my games. Literally in 2019, I sold my Switch. I sold my Xbox One X that I got for Christmas. I sold my entire physical Switch collection, which was over 50 games. And I even sold like parts out of my PC I use for YouTube because I was poor as hell and I'm a family man with 3 kids. I lost my job, had no money. YouTube wasn't cutting it. I was screwed. I sold everything I could sell. I understand that gaming is a luxury. So you either make the sacrifices to do it, or you realize there are technically more important things in life than playing a video game. So why are we bitching about it? These are just companies competing for your bottom dollar, right?
Yep.
That's all they want.
Yep.
They just want your bottom dollar. They're just doing what it takes to try to make the most amount of money. I don't fault any of these companies for doing it. I don't, like, were people mad when Nintendo bought Retro Studios? Like, these companies are just trying to make as much money as they can. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if Sony eventually buys From Software. You know, they get most of the games from Software, even though there's a rumor that Microsoft has a game coming from them soon. But technically, I could see that being a smart purchase for Sony in the future. You know, Sony bought Naughty Dog. Like, this is just what people do. This is the industry we're in. You know, no... It's just like when people get pissy when EA buys a company. It's like, oh yeah, we hate EA. It's like, EA's just doing what everyone else is doing.
Yep.
Trying to make the most money they possibly can. And be happy because you guys do clap back at EA enough that, you know, every now and then they correct their mistakes and give us a good game. Like the last Star Wars game. Like they finally, Squadrons was really good, and then The Last Jedi was really good. Right? Was not The Last Jedi?
No,
that was the movie. God dang it.
Yeah, right.
I just played it. I have it downloaded on my Series X. So it's on Game Pass.
This is gonna bother me.
It's something Jedi. It's something Jedi. I know that. Fallen.
Is it
Fallen Order? Fallen Order. Jedi Fallen Order.
Jedi Fallen Order. Yeah. So like that game ended up being really, really good, and nobody thought that could happen after what they did with Battlefront 2, and stuff like that. You know, Madden right now has a shitload of backlash over the really shitty job they did this year. Watch them correct it next year and do something good. They've been getting backlash over not having college football for so long because of all the contract disputes. Now we're getting NCAA football back. They're not calling it they're just calling it college football. Like, okay, Plants vs. Zombies, oh my God, they really shit the bed, and then they released a good one. Like, speak with your wallet. Companies will correct. And that's what's happening even with EA. You wonder why FIFA hasn't gotten any better? Because people are speaking with their wallet and they keep spending money.
They keep buying it.
Yeah, like it's not going to get better because they keep buying it. But Madden sales are down this year. So the next Madden's going to have positive changes in it because of it. That's speak with your wallet. So like you're not happy that Microsoft bought all these Bethesda stuff? Well then fine. If you own an Xbox platform and you're not happy about it, don't buy the games when they come out. Don't partake in them on Game Pass. It'll make if the sales are way down and Microsoft's not making money on them, you don't think they're going to say, maybe we should put it on PlayStation?
Oh, yeah.
Of course they will.
Yeah.
If you speak it with your wallet. But guess what? We all know what's going to happen. Xbox sales are going to go up. Game Pass subscriptions are going to go up. And the games are going to do record numbers on Xbox platforms. So, be smart with your money. Buy what you can. Enjoy your life. We only got one of them.
Yeah.
And hey, don't be ashamed. Like, I see this happen sometimes. There was someone who, on one of my live streams, was like, because when I told the story about how I sold all my stuff in 2019, because obviously I've rebuilt some of the stuff by now, some of the collection. I don't have all my physical Switch games back. I don't think I'll ever have that many again. But they were like, oh, I would never do that, man. Like, I would like pack that stuff in my car and just like sleep in my car. And it's like, okay. Well,
you try that with
okay. So, like, I lived out of my car. I actually lived out of my car when I was younger. Let me tell you, you live out of your car. How are you going to get out of your living out of your car situation? You need gas in the car to get anywhere, and then you need to have clothes to get a good job, to look good in interviews. You need to go somewhere to take a shower. You know, what if it, like I live in Wisconsin, middle of winter, it's too cold to go to a lake and do it. So, oh goddamn, I got to go spend $10 to get into the YMCA just so I can go in the locker room and shower up quick. Like. These are the sacrifices I made back then. It's like, hey, guess what? There's things that are more important than physical collections of shit.
Also, try living out of your car with 3 kids.
Well, I didn't do that.
Well, no. But
I would never put my kids in that situation.
Exactly.
And that does happen, by the way. There are people that have kids and are homeless.
Oh, no, for sure.
But yeah, I don't know. That's just me. I think people getting angry over this stuff is stupid. Like, there was someone today on Twitter that was like telling me how much the Switch sucks and all this stuff, and it's like, okay, fine. Like, guess what? Not every platform's for everyone, and none of these companies have to cater to your whims. Is it really worth getting super angry about?
Yeah,
like when I was a kid, when I was younger, I used to get mad about this stuff. I used to think this stuff mattered, you know? Now I'm older and I'm like, you know what? This is all entertainment. It's like getting mad that like a show goes from Netflix to Hulu. It's like, yeah, well, what are you gonna do?
Right.
If it matters that much to you, get Hulu too. If you can't afford it, whatever, cancel your Netflix subscription, get Hulu, watch it there, finish up, and then get your Netflix. Like, I don't know, be smart. Anyways,
I want it all.
That's my lesson to end the podcast with. So, guys, you should definitely go check out HMK. He's been popping off his videos and live streams over on Twitch. So check them out. Yeah, basically HMK. Everywhere's a HMA Killer. Can't ever remember.
HM Killer, yeah. HM Killer everywhere.
HM Killer everywhere. So literally, I'll link his Twitch down below, his Twitter, his YouTube, and all that. He does a lot of types of videos. You want to tell what kind of videos you do in case they don't know?
If you guys don't know, over on the HMK channel on YouTube, I do a lot of Legend of Zelda, Nintendo Switch, Super Smash Bros., and Kingdom Hearts videos and stuff. I've been, going here and there with other, topics or whatnot, but that's basically what I'm known for the most. So if that's within the realm of what you're interested in, you should definitely check out my channel over at youtube.com/HMKiller.
Nice. All right. There you guys go. And again, you can check him out on Twitch. He was just, today, he was just streaming Persona, actually, when we're done. Here he's going back to his stream. I saw that. So
yeah,
if that $1 donation at the end, that was me.
Yeah, I saw it. I'm like, hey, oh, that's
Eric. I know you can find him on Twitter at emo something.
8790.
So EMOH8790. You guys know this is Nintendo Prime. You can find this podcast if you don't want to watch the video version. You can go on pretty much any podcast app in the world. Look up Nintendo Prime Podcast. We're there. If you are listening to the audio version and you want to see the video version, how cool the set looks, and see our beautiful faces and any fancy editing I do, which there probably won't be as much in this one because we didn't go into specific games. This was more about a system. Hey, go check it out. Like, I put a lot of time into the set. Eric and I spent a lot of time building the set. We still mess with it every week a little bit to try to make it just right. We still have a few more things we're going to do. Also, like, there might be some more changes coming to the set coming up here. We were thinking about better setups and stuff. So anyways, it's an ever-evolving thing, but the important part is that the conversation's great and you guys had a good time. So appreciate all your guys' feedback down in the comments as well on how we can make this show better or how much you love this show and what you love about it. Otherwise, thank you guys for tuning in. And, hey, HMK, got to get you on a future episode when we're talking about some Zelda.
Oh, definitely, man. You know where to find me.
Yeah, if I didn't already have two guests, I was going to get you, because we did a Zelda 35th episode where we had Game Over Jesse and Misclick on, and I was like, we just don't have room for another one, because I would love HMK on that one. But you know what? When the news drops, 35th anniversary news, Breath of the Wild 2.
Mm-hmm. If and when.
HMK, I mean, Breath of the Wild 2 news for sure is going to come at some point. We were told.
It will.
AJ and Emma told us we're getting news this year. Sometime this year. So
hopefully sooner than later.
Hopefully. I mean, hey, maybe Nintendo actually partakes in the digital event at E3.
Yeah.
That would be sweet.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
They just do their own thing.
I think they do their own thing too. But the only reason why I like them saying they're going to participate in E3 is then we know when it's going to happen. Instead of this whole, we're getting a direct this week, or this week, or this week, or this month. We don't have to speculate. We know. That was the only cool thing about E3 is you just knew on this day every year.
Yep.
Nintendo's doing big, going big. So, all right, thank you guys. Catch you in the next episode. And HMK, screw it. I'm probably gonna watch your stream while I'm editing.
Nice.
There you go.
All right, peace out, guys.